So I brought a blank page with me today, blinking cursor and everything. I love showing this image to people because whenever I do, it invokes three different kinds of reaction out of people. You've got the people who I like to call inspired, people who look at a blank page and think of all the things that they could be putting on there. On the other hand, you've got who I like to call the haunted people, people who look at that same blank page and think of all the things that they should be putting on there, but just haven't yet. Then, of course, you've got people who look at a blank page and look at a screen that is way too darn bright, but that's not what we're talking about today. Whichever category you find yourself falling into, this is a story we've all done before. Whether it was to write one of those pesky cover letters, to send a risky text maybe, or whether it was to tell a story, to take a blank page and to create worlds from it. But it's still a bit of a daunting thing, isn't it? There may well be worlds of possibility at our fingertips, entire languages of words for us to put to paper, but that's when that choice paralysis sets in. Which words do I use? Which ones do I steer clear of? It's not an easy decision. It may seem trivial to those just beyond our screens, but the words that we use, they have meaning, and perhaps much more so than we think. So today, the page that I'm staring down is blank because I get to tell you a story. And that's despite the fact that I have quite the story for you. It's got great sets of protagonists, fearsome enemies to vanquish, and stakes that are simply larger than life itself. But unlike most of the stories that you might find featured on stages like this one isn't about great discoveries, victories, or achievements. This story is one that stems from crises. And what better a place to talk about crises than a room filled with people at the height of their academic achievement. I'd like you to picture somebody for me. Picture a hardworking person, a real go-getter who pursues their goals relentlessly. They're going after what they set out to achieve. They're not taking any prisoners. They are attacking that blank page. Do you have somebody in mind? Well, all their lives, these people have been told that in order to make it in life, all you really need is an iron will and this great set of discipline to sustain you as you take on that arduous climb to the top. But what do you do when you're no longer climbing to the top, but you've already taken the fall? When you find yourselves battered and broken at the bottom, when you watch on helplessly as life continues on without you up above, what can you tell yourselves to get back up then? Well, unfortunately today, this overpowering state of exhaustion is much more common than we think. According to a study by Gallup, just about 3 in every 4 people experience burnout on the job at least sometimes, a rate that only gets worse when zooming in on our generation. 1/5 of people feel they have too much on their plate, and the workplace is becoming an increasingly lonely environment as well. People aren't getting the social interaction they need out of it. We all know at least one person who fits that description. And if we don't, well then chances are that it's us who are suffering. These are some of the most serious issues of our time, and they shouldn't be underestimated. Well, of course, it's always worth seeking out a professional rather than some guy on some stage with a red dot in the middle. There is one thing that we can point to get us started, one thing to serve as a first layer of protection, and that is making storytelling your defense mechanism. When done right, storytelling has the power to change the very fabric of how we interact with one another, whether that be at the workplace or in our personal lives. If anything, there are 3 things that I'd like to leave you with today. And each and every one of those goes to show that storytelling is where it's at. So first up, I'd like to tell you that stories shape perception. Let me tell you what I mean by that. In short, storytelling is nothing if not all-encompassing. Whether we're talking cautionary tales or words of wisdom or that piping hot gossip we give into, stories create a link between the past and the present, and they provide us with a way forward. I say that stories shape perception because when we tell stories, we take that which we have lived through and we process it to find meaning. And as it so turns out, meaning is exactly what we need right now in this fight. According to Gallup, a principal factor linking us to burnout risk lies in the way that we experience the work that we do, much more so than the actual number of hours that we put in. Simply feeling like you have enough time to finish all your work takes your risk of being severely burnt out down by 70%, which simply shows us that the way we perceive the work we do has a huge bearing on how its pressures stand to affect us. Next up, stories stick together. A huge part governing our experience lies in the way that we connect to those around us. Connection is key, that's no surprise to anybody, but that too is chiefly impacted by storytelling. Because for all this time, whenever we've told a story, we have done it to conserve events of the past, to try and preserve accounts, but also to try and share that with other people. And as more and more people succumb to this overpowering state of exhaustion, Gallup tells us that having that connection while at work takes our risk of being burnt out often down by another quarter. Stories stick together, and as it so turns out, sticking together is also exactly what we require right now. So what does that mean for us? Well, the way in which we experience the work that we do has a huge bearing on how we can cope with the pressures that arise from it. Whether we're talking creating meaning, having a sense of control, or having a sense of belonging, all of these dimensions can be tackled by managers by shaping communication in such a way that highlights individual contributions, manages expectations, and encourages and enables connection. This is incredibly relevant, especially to the people in this room. The majority of you will find yourselves in a delegating position to somebody at some point in time, which only means that getting this right has implications for everybody involved. Managers burn out even faster than employees at the individual stage. So if we make it through this, if we manage to apply this, we have implications not just for us, but for those who depend on us as well. Finally, I get to tell you that stories are for everyone. There's simply more to them than pitching yourself in interviews or speaking in front of an audience, maybe. And that's because there is another facet to storytelling that's another matter entirely, and that's telling that story to ourselves. Because when we relate our own path to ourselves rather than in front of other people, well, our language becomes bleaker, less colorful. We tend to trade in optimism for supposed realism. We highlight the things that went badly, and we don't care about the things that went right. But all that does is send us right back to where we started, right back to the bottom of that mountain, right back to that blank page. So how do we make sure our storytelling remains constructive instead? I'd like for you to think about a time that you felt like you failed at something. It could be an internship you were rejected from. God knows we've all been there. It could be a project that didn't go as planned. It could be something from your personal life. Do you have something in mind? I know I do. So now I'd like for you to look at that incident, but not in isolation, and rather as part of something bigger. Is this really the final blow that will bring you to your knees, or is this just another stepping stone in a much bigger journey? Is this really the end? When you've done that, I'd like for you to think about how you felt when you experienced that incident of failure. I'd like for you to take those feelings, those thoughts, and put them in the context of a story. What would that story go like? What would that story sound like if you told it to somebody else? Would it be as punishing as it might feel just now? When you've got this new perspective, one that is hopefully a little more forgiving than the one that we're used to when we're alone, I'd like for you to take that perspective and apply it over and over again. Because tell yourself a story enough times, and your brain will have a funny way of believing you. What kind of a story that winds up being? Well, it's entirely up to you. Stories are for everyone. And that leaves one thing, and one thing only. Whatever happened to that story I promised? In truth, I told you I was going to tell you a story today, and in doing so, I told you a lie. That blinking cursor that you've got up there, that's not for me, it's for you. as future cogs in the wheel that makes this place go round, the way in which you communicate right now might just have huge implications for those who depend on you. Stories shape perception, stories stick together, and stories are for everyone. But the best part is that the impact doesn't stop there. Next time you tell yourself your own story, please make sure you tell it with the kindness that you deserve. Because after all, the way you tell your story right now might just have a bearing on your next chapter. Thank you.